review by way of visual aid, if I can get myself there. Okay. I don't know how well some of you can see this, but I'm going to hop up on the stage and point at stuff because this will not take a light from a pointer. So we talked about this a little bit this morning in Sunday school. We have the various camps of Israel around the tabernacle. And you see there, the little center there is the camp of Levi, and there's the tabernacle. And if your eyes are real sharp, you maybe could see the brazen altar and the laver and the holy place and the most holy place. I'll have a bigger picture of the tabernacle next slide. So don't strain your eyes trying to see it here. But what you do see is that you've got the camp of Levi all the way around the tabernacle. And you see Moses and the priests are on the east side. And then to the south is Kohath, to the north is Merari, and to the west is Gershon. And that's how it's arranged. And they're surrounding the tabernacle so that people can't get through to the tabernacle without passing through all these filters. So that's how it was set up. And then the camp itself was oriented to the east. And so the entrance to the tabernacle is where Moses and the priests were. And then the three tribes that are guarding that direction, again, their tent openings facing toward the tabernacle are Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And sometimes people ask, well, why did they feel like they had to point the camp to the east? And I don't know if there's a deep reason. Sometimes we need to be careful not to over-spiritualize some of the things that we see here. I think my personal guess is that it was a very practical and simple thing that they did. Where does the sun rise? In the east. And it simply was, we're going to get organized around the thing that we see every day. And so the tabernacle is going to point to where the sun rises, and when the sun rises, it will shine light into the tabernacle, and there were things that were to happen at sunrise in the tabernacle, sacrifices that were to be made. And light was shining through into the tabernacle while these things were being done, okay? So I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that it was as simple as that. And I'm not going to go into the weeds and look for other things. I think it was a very, very simple thing that was going on there. So we've got camped east from the entrance to the tabernacle, east from Moses and his family, the tribes of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And if you add the numbers together, that's the biggest army. That's the biggest of the four that could field a military. And then to the north, you've got Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. To the south, Gad, Simeon, and Reuben. And to the west, Benjamin, Manasseh, and Ephraim. And so there's multiple layers working its way through. And this is very organized, as we're going to see here in a few minutes when we look at the marching order in Numbers chapter 4. But I'll leave that for now. We'll come back to this slide and develop the marching order a little bit. This is a picture of the tabernacle. And we've got the brazen altar there. And in front of the entrance to the tabernacle, there's a screen. That blue line is the entrance to the tabernacle. But it wasn't like a person could see right in most of the time. Most of the time there was a screen there. Okay? So you got the altar of burnt offering, the brazen altar, the laver, and then we've got and all of this is considered the outer courtyard, and it surrounds everything. Inside of that is 3 pillars and a screen that screen off the holy place. And you get the table of showbread, the menorah, the altar of incense. And then inside that, you've got 4 more pillars that held up another screen that separated the holy place from the most holy place. The only thing in the most holy place was the Ark of the Covenant. And that room was only entered once a year. And again, we'll get into some of the details of what that would look like and how that operated. And if you think about it, well, then how do you pick that thing up and carry it around? If only one person is supposed to be in there or see that piece of furniture once a year, how do you pick that up and carry it around? And we'll get into a little bit of that here a little later this morning. And then finally, I've got this picture, which is an artist's rendition of what it may have looked like. You see the white walls and we'll talk about dimensions when we get a little further in here. And then at the entrance, right there, you see that it's not white, but rather that it's blue. Maybe you can't see that. This is the best I could find. I looked for a high-resolution picture, and this is the best I could get. But you see that there's a blue change in the color there. The curtain that kind of separated, which was the gate, but which was a kind of a barrier, was blue. And then next you have the brazen altar. Deeper in you've got the laver, the big pool of water, and then there's the tabernacle, and you see that it's constructed as a box, but then it's overcovered with another tent-like structure, and you see that tied off to the ground there. And then we are told that there is a pillar of fire, or a pillar of cloud, over the most holy place all the time that Israel was in their sojourn, and that if it lifted up and began to travel, then they would pack up and go. If it hovered over, then they would settle and stay. All right? So that's what this is depicting. This is an artist's description of what it may have looked like. And you do see that there's the tribe of Levi here that's surrounding it, and we don't see into the far distance, but this would have been a colossal encampment. Hundreds of thousands of tents. Really, really, really big thing going on here. And, we're seeing probably 100 tents, maybe 150. So we've got a picture of the tabernacle, but the size of this moving body of people is, I don't think our minds get around it. I really don't. I can imagine the number 100. We've got about 100 chairs in this room. I can imagine the number 1,000. I can count to it. When you start getting to 10,000, when we've been there 10,000 years, things pass from what our minds can grasp and just go into hyperbole. And we're not actually interacting with ideas. We just think we're interacting with ideas. So I say that to say, this camp of millions of people, it's hard to picture, it's hard to imagine how huge it was. And I'm sure there are artists' rendition of a top-down view of it, but even a top-down view of it wouldn't do it justice. I think the only way that we could feel the holiness of God and the separation from it would be to start at the outside of the tribe of Judah and spend 4 to 6 hours walking through the camp of Israel and hitting checkpoints, more or less, and being stopped or sneaking past, and being stopped or sneaking past, until finally we get to Moses and the priests, and those guys are like, we all know each other. There's only a couple hundred of us, and you're not one of us. Turn around and go. There's no getting past that barrier unless you're coming for the purpose of sacrifice. Unless you're coming with that purpose. To get close to the holiness of the Lord through the blood of a sacrifice. So, hopefully that puts a frame of reference into some of the things that we talked about earlier, and I hope it helps us understand some of the intricacies that we'll be looking at in Numbers chapter 4. Jeremiah, I moved. Maybe the camera's still on me. Oh, it's up there. Oh, that's better. No camera on. Oh, now it's on me. I don't want the camera on me. Okay, so let me just glance at Numbers 2. Okay, so we've talked in detail about the arrangement of the camp. We've got that, we've got a snapshot of that in our heads, and we understand a little bit of how that worked and why the numbers are what they are. We looked at chapter 3 this morning in great detail, and we have in chapter 3, 14, 21, and 27, 3 summaries of the duties of the tribe of Levi, the sub-clans in the tribe of Levi. And one of the reasons for this is that moving this group of people more than a couple hundred yards in one day would have been a logistical impossibility unless they were so amazingly organized that it was miraculous. I mean, could you pack up your tent and go if that pillar of cloud that changed from a pillar of fire a half hour ago suddenly lifted up and started floating away? Probably not. I couldn't pack up my tent and go. I'm not even in a tent. If I was in a tent, I couldn't pack it up and go. But these people were expected to. And there was a specific order of march that they were supposed to pack up and go at. And we'll get into that order of march, probably not today, but sometime. We'll look at that and we'll see how that worked. And so, the detail that we're looking at here in chapters 3 and 4 is not the whole nation of Israel's order of march, but how it is that the tabernacle part of this, the most important part, the part that lets you get next to the holiness of God, to get connected to Him, how that particular part of it worked. And we're told that the Gershonites had this part of responsibility, and we're told that the Kohathites had this part of the responsibility, and they were supervised by one of the sons of Aaron, and the Merarites had this part of the responsibility. And so when it was time to move, certain sequences of events would begin to happen, and the tabernacle would start to get packed up and get ready to move. And it was done in a very, very particular way. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the tabernacle. Let's go this direction. What is it with all this furniture? I forgot my phone. I'm not going to have any idea what time it is. Could someone wave at me when we're 5 minutes out? So, Mike?
11:13.
I want to know when it's 11:40. Okay? I want to know when it's 11:40. What is it that we've got here when it comes to all this different furniture? And again, I want to express some caution in the way that we look at this. It's very easy to spiritualize the components of the tabernacle, the furniture. Now, I want to be careful to not spiritualize these parts of what God has commanded. That doesn't mean that there is no symbolism going on here. There is some symbolism. And we've got to restrict ourselves to Revelation to accept the symbolism that's there and to not go beyond what God has revealed. And it's actually something that we need to be cautious about. So, to do this, we're actually going to spend some time in the book of Exodus, because the description of the tabernacle is more detailed in the book of Exodus. So turn to Exodus 26. And we're doing this so that we understand the great detail of what goes on in Numbers chapter 4, how the tabernacle gets packed up and who's responsible for what. To do that, we got to get into the different parts and what's going on here, all right? And for this, I am borrowing from a pastor friend that used to pastor in Granite Falls, Ryan Martin. I was doing research and I sent queries out to a couple of friends asking them if they had any pictures that were better than mine, and none of them did. But Ryan had some really good notes. And so I just printed his notes and highlighted the stuff that I wanted to use, giving credit where credit is due, all right? Because I didn't want to reinvent the wheel on this. Okay, so we're going to start with this big white curtain around the tabernacle. You guys see that? And then there's the blue gateway curtain. This big white curtain would have stood out. You guys got issues back there?
It's blue. It's pink and a violet color.
This is supposed to be blue.
Oh no, that's magenta.
The lava is blue. Doesn't matter.
We know what you meant. What the lady said to me, we knew what we were saying. Continue.
I'm colorblind. I don't care. Okay. So the main border that would have been around the tabernacle courtyard, not the holy place and the holiest place, but the main border that would have been around the large complex was made up of white curtains, heavy, heavy fabric. All right? It would have been a combination of linen and yarn. And then the entrance would have been blue. And the tabernacle itself, as we saw in that other picture, was actually covered in scarlet. You can kind of see that scarlet look there. And we'll go into some of the materials of that here in a few minutes. But there were these huge curtains, and they were segments of curtains. So it wasn't like they would lay out this giant square of one continuous curtain, but rather each of the long sides of the tabernacle would have 10 sections, 10 curtains that would be hooked together, that would be joined together so that they could be taken apart and easily transported for traveling, right? Because that's what this is. This is a tent. It's a travel house, not a foundation house. So there were 10 curtains on each side. Each curtain would be 28 cubits long, which is about 42 feet long. So each section was 42 feet long, which is 21 of these squares. So let me count it out. From this chair, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So just outside this wall. Or, okay, it's about the length of this building. 10 of those. So this is not a small area. It's 10 times the length of our of this room, one side. And then the other sides would be about four times the length of this building. So that's the cube of it. These curtains were about 15 feet tall. We're about 12 feet to that soffit, right? I think we're about 12 feet to the soffit. So really close to the height of the lowest part of our ceiling. Really, really up there. That's tall. You can't see over that unless you're doing it on purpose. And everyone in the camp sees you building this little thing to try to see over the top. And everyone's like, no, you're not doing that. And then you get stopped, all right? So that's the wall that goes around. It's a fabric wall, but it's a wall. It's not a minor structure. It's a structure that's designed to be carried. Now, there's 2 layers to this white covering, and the inner layer is one of goat's hair. Goat's hair would have been black. So you've got white and black. White on the inside, black on the outside. And then in addition, there are more coverings, and we talked about those a second ago, when we looked at the covering over the tabernacle itself. So we've got the wall covering that goes around the tabernacle, and then around the courtyard, and then we've got the tent covering, which goes over the tabernacle proper, the holy place and the most holy place. And as we see, that is a different kind of covering. It had 3 different layers to it. There was ram skins tanned and dyed red, which is the outer part. And then there was a waterproofing section over that was probably sewn together like dolphin or sea cow skins, a waterproof covering that was included over that. And we're not going to go into all the verses, but if you want to read the record, Exodus 26 to the end of the book has got amazing detail about how this all worked. And as you see in this picture, the outer covering of the tabernacle, not the structure itself, it comes down at an angle and is tied off to the ground. That's actually described here. That's an accurate representation of that. Now, the tabernacle itself, as you see, it's a high structure. It was also 15 feet high. In the Bible, you'll see that described as 10 cubits. Usually a cubit's about 18 inches. A grown man's hand from tip to tip, about 18 inches. That was their method of measuring. Everyone carried their ruler. Problem was the tall guys had a bigger ruler than short guys. But everyone carried their ruler with them. But generally speaking, that's a pretty good guess, 15 feet high. So the interior of the holy place and the most holy place was all the way up there. It was 15 feet high. That's how high it went up there. Now, the structure, not of the tent part that goes over the tabernacle, over the holy place and the most holy place, but the holy place and the most holy place themselves were frames. So you had frames of acacia wood, which is almost always the wood that God uses in construction of furniture for his stuff. And these were fabric-covered acacia wood frames, panels, and they would have been about 15 feet high. And they would have had one design facing inward toward the inside of the sanctuary, and another design obviously facing outward toward the courtyard of the larger portion of the tabernacle. And I'm not going to go into descriptions of what exactly that looked like. You can go into the text and look for that yourself. Inside that area, which was 10 feet tall, was the holy place and the most holy place. And we've seen and talked about some of the furniture, and we'll go into a little more detail here. The separation between the most holy place and the holy place is another curtain, and this curtain is 10 feet by 10 feet, 10 cubits by 10 cubits. So it's a 15 cubit square. It's a 10 cubit square, 15 foot square. So let's step that out. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So from that chair to here would be the short width of the tabernacle. So I'm standing at the door to the holy place where those 3 pillars are, just on the other side of the blue dot, the laver. And as I'm standing at it, from this chair to that chair, I'm standing about in the middle. Okay? It's a pretty big room. And it goes back about 30 feet. And then after you go back about 30 feet, there's another curtain, which is also a 15 foot by 15 foot square. And beyond that, there's a 15 by 15 foot room in which rests the Ark of the Covenant. Okay? So I don't know if you're picturing this too well, but that's kind of a spatial representation of what we've got kind of flat on here. All right, let's see. I guess I didn't like much of the rest of his notes. Okay, so let's talk now about the altar of burnt offering. That's the big one just inside the first entrance to the tabernacle area. This is a really big altar. It's 7.5 feet square. So let's walk that off. 2, 4, 6. So it's from here to there in a full square. So probably kind of pretty close back to where Corey's sitting, just one row in front of Corey. And then it would have been 4.5 feet high. So it would have been up right about here. All right? Really, really big altar. And again, I'm not going to go too deep into the nitty-gritty of its construction because you can look at that. It was made to be hollow. It was covered in bronze, not gold. Almost everything else is covered in gold. This was covered in bronze, not gold. It was beaten bronze. There are passages in Leviticus which seem to imply that sometimes the bronze of this structure was added to. More bronze was layered onto it, and sometimes gold. So if you're really interested, you can go hunt that passage out yourself. I'm not telling you where it is. You got to go find that yourself. We talked about it earlier this morning, though. Hint. Okay, so there was to be fire kept in this altar burning at all times. It was hollow. It had kind of a grated burning area, and then a second area underneath that where there would be fire. What?
Wasn't there a covering with the tabernacles and with this altars?
You mean the red here?
Yeah, wasn't there a covering over that?
Over the whole thing? No. It was open to the air except for the holy place and the most holy place. Okay, so the brazen altar, fire was to be kept burning in it at all times. And it was from the coals of that fire that Nadab and Abihu were to take coals to put in their censers to burn as they burned incense before the Lord. It is my guess that they didn't take it from there. Either coals had been removed from there and put in another place because they had to add more wood. And so they took coals from the other place, or they grabbed coals and put it in their censers on the way in, or they brought other coals in. Something wasn't right. I don't know what it was, and what it was isn't actually terribly important, but this is my guess. And so that's what happens there, and that's why when they go into the holy place with their censers right there, as they're entering past that blue curtain to go into the holy place with their censers, fire comes out, and they're consumed, because they were about to enter in a way that was not in accordance with how God told them they should approach His holiness. This is the only way to do it, he said. And they didn't do it that way. So this is the brazen altar, hundreds of sacrifices a day. Also, not in this picture, but around the brazen altar and the laver would have been tables, probably twice the size of this guy, where butchery would have been happening. You bring an animal in, you cut its throat, you pour its blood into a bowl, or lots of bowls, and you put it up, and you cut it up, and put the parts that you're supposed to put on the fire, put other parts in a boiling cauldron. There's many intricacies going on here, and they had to have furniture, they had to have workspace for that, and so there were other things in here that we see alluded to in other places in Scripture that aren't covered in as great detail, because they aren't part of the sacrifice process. They aren't part of the sweet savor to the Lord process that is so important. Let's see. Some of this stuff is repeating, I'm sorry. Okay, so remember how wide that front entrance was? It's about as wide as this this building. Do you see how big the gate is? If you just look around the corner, the part of the wall that is white is probably from here to that wall, and from midway through the piano to that wall. The gate to get into the tabernacle is huge. It's this wide open space. And here's where I don't want to cross from symbolism to spiritualism, but not just two people at a time or one person at a time get through into the tabernacle. Whole crowds can fit in here. God is inviting His people in. They have to come in the right way. They have to follow the procedures. They have to have hearts that are holy unto Him. That's necessary. But if you fulfill the requirements, there's a wide open door. Alethea? You understand? Okay, go. Sorry about that. So, there is access to God, but only on certain terms. Now, our access to God is only on certain terms too. There is one way under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved, through Jesus Christ, who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Wide is the way that leads to destruction. Narrow is the gate that leads to life. Jesus is that way. Now, there's plenty of room for everyone who will come. It's not a restricted passage. It's just an illustration of those who are willing to walk it. Okay. Last page. So, we have a whole system that is being built. Part of the purpose of that system is to give reverence to God and His holiness, to set it up as high as it can be set up by people. We can never exalt God as high as He deserves to be, but it is our responsibility to exalt Him as high as we can. And God accepts that. He understands our limitations, but we are responsible to exalt Him in His holiness as high as we can. He deserves that, and we ought to give it to Him. If we aren't giving it to Him, then we're like Nadab and Abihu. We're coming with our own fire in the censer. and were not approaching appropriately. Another purpose for the way that all this was set up was so that the people of Israel could travel in an organized fashion. And again, I'm not going to get into a lot of details on this, but let's just talk through the tabernacle here. The poles that you see on either side of the Ark of the Covenant, those poles actually tended to extend outside the wall of the tabernacle. That's how they were instructed to be made. And if you look at the dimensions that they're described in the book of Exodus, they're longer than 15 feet. They're 18 feet, I think, is what it would math out to. This was so that the priests who are in the holy place could take the curtain between the holy place and the most holy place down and walk backwards with it and drape it over the top of the Ark of the Covenant. Once it was draped over, Levites of the Kohathite clan would be able to grab those poles and get the Ark of the Covenant out of the most holy place while it was disassembled. But no one would see it because it was covered by the curtain that separated the most holy place from the holy place. Make sense? All right? And similar things would be happening between the courtyard and the holy place. All of these things would be carried out in procession. In procession, the first tribes to go off would be that of Judah. They had the largest armies. They would be in front. They would have scouts out. They would move like a military company. And then following them would be Levi and all this furniture. And then the other sections of camp would follow them in their turn. All right? So that's how this worked. Now, at the time of the writing of this set of organization, wrong direction. At the time of the setting of this organization, we are still in the first generation of the people of Israel after they were delivered from slavery in Egypt. And this was all set up to get them ready to travel to the Promised Land, cross the Jordan River in a couple of months, and go claim the promise that God had given to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and to them. All right? As far as they knew, and as far as God was intending, that's what was going to happen next. Now, we know that didn't happen next, because in a couple of months they get to the borders and they say, there's giants in them there hills. It's dragons, but you know what I mean. There's giants in them there hills, and I'm not going in there. I'm going to get squashed like a cricket. I don't want to go in there. God's not big enough. God's not strong enough. And so this entire setup, instead of being used for a few months and then through a couple years of conquest, because it would have traveled with them during their conquest, and the conquest took 2 to 8 years, depending on how you look at the account of the book of Joshua. Well, that's an oversimplification, but the big events took about that amount of time. John, you checking the time?
No.
What time is it?
11:34.
Oh, I'm getting there. All right. So this thing that would have been used for probably less than a decade until the tabernacle was more or less settled in its place in Israel ends up being used